and I quote, quite obviously does not have a racist bone in her body. On Friday, Marieha Hussain was acquitted of the charges, prompting applause and cheering from her supporters in the public gallery. She made this statement outside court.
Despite the pressure from the CPS and the police, Judge Vanessa Lloyd has seen through this politicised prosecution and I have found justice today. The damage done to my reputation and image can never be undone, and I am proud to have defended the principle that our language and political critique is not illegal.
Now, we're going to talk about this case tonight, and it demands an important adult conversation about language. There are, of course, BBC rules we have to stick to in having this conversation, but please be aware, some of you may find some of the language that you're about to hear offensive. I do want to hear what you think about this tonight. You can call or WhatsApp 08085 909 693. You can text me as well, 85058. Just before we came on air tonight, I spoke to two people who've been following this case really closely. The BBC's community affairs correspondent, Ashitha Nagesh, and Nels, Abbey, an author who has become friends with Marieha Hussain through covering this case. I started by asking Ashitha for the background on Marieha Hussain's case.
So it's all started at a pro-Palestinian protest last November, on Armistice Day, actually. Marieha Hussain is a secondary school teacher, and she went to the march with her husband and some relatives and two children. When she was there, she says that, a lot of people stopped her to take pictures with her placards because they were funny. And, at sort of towards the end of the march, she heard a voice, couldn't see who it was, but heard a man's voice call out and ask her, hey, can I take a picture of you with your placard? So she held it up, and it showed a drawing of Suella Braverman as Cruella de Vil, with the caption Suella de Vil. And the voice asked her, no, not that side. Can you turn it around? The other side. So she did. And on the other side was, the placard you mentioned earlier. It was a drawing of a palm tree with coconuts falling off, and on two of the coconuts were pasted photos of Suella Braverman, then the Home Secretary, and Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Just obviously to give a bit of explanation, coconut generally means brown on the outside, white on the inside. After that, that photo almost immediately appeared on social media, went viral. It was posted first by a right-wing anonymous blog called Harry's Place, and that's how the Met Police saw it. Now, at the trial this week, we actually heard from a Met Police staff member who was working in the comms team at the time, and he explained how they had been alerted to it by, being tagged in the post, and then they posted saying they were actively looking for Marieha.
The surprising thing about this case is it makes it all the way to trial.
Exactly. She was then charged about 6 months later in May with racially aggravated public order offence, which is basically an offence committed at a protest or generally disordered. Not in this case, it was a peaceful protest, but with a racial element. What the prosecutor sort of said at the trial this week was that, coconut is a well-known racial slur. Just Jonathan Bryan, the prosecutor, described it as, I'm quoting here, in other words, you're a race traitor. You're less brown or black than you should be. And so what they were trying to argue is that crossed the line from being, a legitimate political critique and political expression into being racially abusive. And that sort of formed basically the center, the heart of the case and the trial. And it sparked this huge debate in court about the meaning of coconut and what level of offence it can actually cause.
Well, aside from the prosecution putting that forward, that definition that you just used there, did they have any expert witnesses to corroborate that? Did they have anyone with the facts to say, actually, yeah, this is a really quite heinous racial slur?
So no, they actually, it did come out in court that they had actually contacted several experts in racism, academics, and all of the people that they contacted to provide evidence in support of their case had explicitly refused. One of those experts was Professor Kehinde Andrews, a specialist in Black studies, and he had, according to the evidence that came out in court, he'd sent what they called quite a lengthy response, explaining why he wouldn't be supporting that argument and saying that coconut was not a racial slur.
I mean, the point that I'm trying to make here is that the prosecution had no expert witness to back up their argument here.
Exactly.
So take us through then. We've reached this point where the case has been thrown out. It's been quite lengthy. What were the findings at the end? What did the judge say?
Well, she said that the placard formed legitimate political critique. It was it constituted political satire, and that it didn't cross that line into being considered criminally abusive. And I think that's key because I know coconut is such a contentious term. I mean, we wouldn't be discussing it here if it wasn't. There is a range of opinion, and it's not really about whether people find it offensive or not, or and obviously it's used in lots of different contexts, and it can be used as a joke, it can be used as banter, or it can be used as an insult or pejorative.
Yeah.
But it's about whether, in this case, it crossed that line into being, not just insulting or offensive, but criminally abusive, and that is, there's quite a high threshold for that. And ultimately it wasn't, and it didn't.
We'll get into the the logistics of language and who owns it and who can use it in a few moments. But just very quickly, and we should say this has happened before, where the word coconut has come before the courts. What happened last time?
Yes, exactly. This was a case that was heard in 2010 in Bristol. A Lib Dem councillor called Shirley Brown, during a heated debate in the council, she called a Conservative councillor, Jay Jetwer, a coconut. She was convicted of racial harassment following a trial, and she was given a 12-month conditional discharge and ordered to pay just over £600 in costs. And that case was referenced by the prosecution in the trial this week. They sort of tried to argue that there had been a precedent for coconut being seen as racial harassment, as a term of racial harassment.
Nels, what was your reaction to hearing that not guilty verdict?
It ranks in the top 20 best moments of my life.
Tell me why.
It was a moment of phenomenal relief, but also a reassertion of confidence of somewhere within the justice system that common sense can be allowed to prevail. But most importantly, I had seen and gotten to know Marieha from almost the outset of this moment. And I had seen the effect it had on her life. I had seen the effect it had on her parents. I had seen the absurdities the state had been to in order to actually to bring a trial against her and charges against her. I'd seen the harassment she'd faced. I'd seen the harassment her parents had faced. I had seen the absolute worst of the British state's bone-crushing machine or so, and not just the British state, but British media's complicity within it or so, all for a young lady performing a civic duty in actually trying to hold those in power to account, but also to engaging in that most British of the elements of humor, satire.
Well,
basic satire.
That's where the controversy comes in, doesn't it, Nels, about language and this term specifically. Let's stick with this term specifically for now, coconut, because there is a line, and there is a line between what is a slur and what is banter, and then there is another line between that and what is criminal. Now, what do you make of where the line stands on that word, Nels?
The line is not clear. That's the issue. The line is far from clear. But also, too, one thing that is clear is that it was stupid from the get-go to bring these charges against her. And the reason why I say so is because Everybody and their mother who the police spoke to said that, well, the people who go on the record and say that, look, would say anything to police, would made it clear that this is not racist. Us, everybody who writes on race in any form of with any form of significant respect or following in Britain or so, who've published work on this amongst other things, professors, academics, you name it. So we all said the exact same thing. I personally performed. I run an organization called Uppity, the Intellectual Playground. We assembled black and brown people galore together, and we actually put the word coconut on trial and brought in people who actually thought it should be a hate crime. And by the end of it, out of 140 people in the room, only two of them said that it should be a hate crime. And out of those, I must be clear, one of the debaters fled, and the other one, who is Femi from Brexit fame, who we all know, Femi Oluwole, most famously known for Brexit, he switched sides and said it should not be a hate crime. So by the end of it, it was pretty much a GB News presenter and his younger sister who stood up and said that, yes, this should be a hate crime.
But those people's opinions still do count, though, on this, regardless of who they are. I should say as well that the Crown Prosecution Service said our prosecutors reviewed this case carefully and concluded there was enough evidence for it to be presented to court. That's, they're saying that there was enough to take it to court, and that's why it was taken to court. And like you say, whatever people think about the word, is it not the duty of our police and our prosecution system to get to the bottom of whether something is racist or not, and whether something is criminal or not?
Yeah, but of course it is. But when the overwhelming majority of black and brown people, particularly black and brown people whose expertise it is to understand these things and try and inform the nation about it, they are overwhelmingly telling you this is not racist, and they're giving you context to it, and the context is making sense. If you ignore all of them, and for some bizarre reason you're paying attention to some anonymous blog that is located in Washington, D.C., and seem to be so eager to please whoever's behind that blog or so, and suddenly you're ignoring absolutely everybody. You're ignoring the common sense that's there. But this was never a serious case.
Let's talk about the language, actually, because this is the really important part of all of this. So the word coconut, right, which we're using in context, and that is not a word that even I would be allowed to use on air outside of that context. Give us a bit of the history of that, and give us a bit of where that word comes from and where it sits as we stand in the year 2024, Nels.
So the word coconut did not fall out of a coconut tree, to misquote Kamala Harris's mum, or to butcher her quotes. It didn't fall out of a coconut tree. Coconut is a byproduct of the history of colonized people. Colonization or any form of oppression breeds lexicons. It breeds language. It breeds words. It breeds mythology. If you go to the Native Americans, they use the term apple, meaning red on the outside, white on the inside. If you go to the Far East, China and Japan, so they use the term banana, meaning yellow on the outside, white on the inside. If you go to America or so, they often reference their struggle for independence against the British. So they often evoke names like Benedict Arnold, meaning that you are behaving like our collaborator class. If you come to Britain, or so, we often evoke the term Lord Haw if we are trying to speak to somebody who is probably a bit too sympathetic or too aligned with an adversarial, hostile power. We use that because Lord Haw was, of course, a Nazi collaborator. He was actually Irish-American Nazi collaborator because he was hanged or hung, whichever it is might be, by the British after the actual war ended. So what happens is that history experiences, particularly shocking experiences for people, they breed terminologies, language. For black and brown people, the term coconut was one of those terminologies. It has a literal meaning. You could say that, okay, it means white on the outside, black on the inside.
Sure,
but what it really means is that you are behaving effectively in a manner, you are damaging or hurting us in a manner similar to those to those who oppressed us in the past. It is a metaphorical term. It's a metaphorical term that was done to satirical excellence by Marieha Hussain in this situation. It doesn't mean, it's not denigrating anybody. But I'm speaking the political sense right now. There's also the cultural sense. The cultural sense is even more satirical. It just means that, look, you might be somebody who likes your rice pudding a little bit more than say your kahari keema
Well,
or
isn't
your
that
jollof rice.
isn't that where
And
we run into difficulties there? Because it's a word that could mean, something quite, quite serious, in terms of us and them, that sort of language. But also it can be used in a banterous way. Ashitha, you are a communities sort of expert and a community affairs correspondent for the BBC. In terms of what you see about how people have used that word and viewed that word, especially I'm talking about here in Black and Asian communities, what have you found?
Well, it is divisive. It would be wrong to sort of say that everyone has, obviously not everyone has one view,
Sure. And I
um
think as well with this, you run into a bit of a difficulty of then sort of generalising an entire vast, diverse community by saying everyone feels the same way when we know that's not the
yeah,
case.
exactly. And it is so nuanced, and that came out in court as well. That was a huge part of, what was sort of came out in a lot of the expert evidence, because they talked about the range of ways that it's used and the history of it, as Nels quite rightly it describes like the history and the roots of it, but also its use in popular culture today. And they talked about Benjamin Zephaniah, the late Benjamin Zephaniah. They talked about post-colonial theorist Frantz Fanon, and his text Black Skin, White Masks.
Mhm.
But also, pop culture, there's a joke from Ramesh Ranganathan that got referenced in court, where he talks about his mum calling him a coconut for not being able to speak Tamil.
Mm,
And you're laughing, Rima.
yeah.
But that's a clip that like my parents sent me when it came out.
Right.
Like
So
it's
you
not a
so
joke.
so your
But
parents have used that and it's been used in a light-hearted way is what you're saying.
yeah, you would have, like, I've heard it used in a light-hearted sort of banterous way, but of
Mm,
course context is everything, because I also know that it can be used within some communities to ostracize people, or
mm,
as a way of like a kind of, it can be seen as a way of policing people for not conforming to certain ideals. and
right.
and it
but that,
really
that
is,
policing, that
not to be BBC about it, I don't have an opinion about it, but um, I see all sides. Not I, to give an extremely BBC answer, but
Mm.
there is a range, such a range of experience with the word, and such a range of views on the word, and I think
And
it
it
probably
could
fluctuates.
and that experience and that lived experience is all valid and it is shaped by how that word has been used by yourself, but also how that word might have been used against each individual. Now, what were you going to say there?
Oh, that policing itself is not inherently unjust, and neither is it actually unusual. Because if you are somebody who comes from the community and you are being used to damage the community, that hurts the community. And the community has to find a way to make sure that that doesn't happen to them. So if all they can use is just a rhetorical device to remind you of how you're behaving and how it damages them, that's not inherently a bad thing. The state, for example, the British state, if I right now, or any of the three of us on this telephone right now, suddenly just develop some sort of overburning sympathy for the Russian state and decided to actually feed them information or whatever it might be or so, the British state would rightfully put us in prison because it's a behavior that is damaging and undermining to the national security and the prosperity of the British state. This is not it's not an equivalence, it's a parallel that we're seeing between the two of them over here.
Is it
So I don't think,
helpful though, Nels?
of
Is it
course.
helpful to have language where you say, okay, this community can use this word and only they can use it? Because there's a difference, isn't there, between Ashita's parents, sending her a link saying, look at this, this coconut thing, and it's because you can't speak Tamil or whatever it is. And there's a
Mhm.
difference between, for example, a white person on the street calling a black person a coconut. Where's
Mhm.
the difference there?
There's a massive difference because again, because look where these terminology came from. So the concept of coconut, so as I said, it didn't fall out of a coconut tree. It is a byproduct of the oppression that we witnessed, that we experienced. than we witness and we experience. It's our history or so. So if you're as a white person who are pretty much the beneficiary, at least a bit notionally of the beneficiary of the upper hand of that experience of that oppression, and so suddenly start to throw that word around towards the black or brown person, it has very different meaning, very different connotations. Additionally, too, this terminology is something we describe as intra-communal discussion, intra-communal terminology. Every single community has this type of terms. LGBT people, for example, reclaimed the word queer and re-mainstreamed it essentially, and pretty much made it permissible for everybody to use it. Disabled communities, for example, have, as I understand it, the word say short for cripple, for example, or that sort of stuff too. And so there's terminologies that become as a result of a shared experience, a shared degree of a shared experience that is vital to understanding where the terminology comes from. So if you are outside of that community, particularly if you are somebody who historically was pretty much came from the group that was actually oppressive to that community, of course there's going to be a very different approach, a different response to it.
Sure. Just out of interest, Nels, have you ever been called a coconut? How did you react? Who was it? What context was it in?
Many times. My daughter called me a coconut this morning. Many times. I've been called stronger words than coconut. I've been called stronger words than coconut. I've been called stronger words for coconut. I won't go into what those words are, but they are equally as valid. And do you want to know what? That word was absolutely vital because at the time I was working in the corporate world and I was playing the game and doing things that were harmful to the community. And when I walked inside the room, you know what's worse than being called a coconut?
What?
Walking inside the room and then seeing a group of black and brown people and they just go silent and they don't want to talk around you. They just are completely like, no, your behavior has put you in a place right now whereas they're basically telling you via silence that your behavior is put you in a place where we just don't want anything to do with you. That is hurtful, but it's a form of intra-communal regulatory behavior to ensure that you are aware of the fact that you are actually hurting people. Because there's nothing worse than you walk out of a jovial room and the moment you walk inside there, it's just like, oh, better not say anything.
There's the other argument though as well that it's just it's forcing everyone to conform to one view.
No, it is not.
No, it is not.
No, it is not. That is the white supremacist argument there. No, it is not forcing people to conform to one view. It is making sure that people know if you are harming the collective. That is very clear. Britain has many different views. Britain as a society has many different views, but if you step in one particular direction or so, as I point out the Russia example just earlier on right now, you are going in a direction that's going to harm the collective. And Britain has to make it clear to you that this is a level of behavior that we cannot accept, and we are going to take mechanisms to make sure you don't do it anymore. But communities, we don't have that sort of state power. We're not going to put somebody in prison for basically for behaving in a way that might potentially we don't have the power to put, say, Suella Braverman in prison for some of her transgressions and her folly in the slightest bit. But at the same time, what we do have essentially is the ability to perhaps put up a placard that would jokingly refer to her as a coconut or something else like that, or to shun her, which many of us have chosen to do also.
Well,
even her own party's now doing that.
I think what we've seen just from this conversation is that there are still quite a lot of different views on this one term, coconut, within the community. I mean, you use the term intra-community words, and I think this is definitely one of them. I'd just like to end by asking about how Marieha is doing, just because we've seen that this has been a really long case. It's been dragged through the courts, and she's pregnant, isn't she? She's spent basically all of her pregnancy fighting this.
Marieha Hussain is somebody who I will admire and be in awe of until the day I die. At the beginning of this or so, Marieha and I had a conversation, and I promised her, I said to her, one day our grandchildren, your grandchildren and my grandchildren will sit down in a room and think of this time, that the fight and the battle that we all had to go through over here, but you in particular had to go through, and they will find a way to smile and reminisce about it and be proud of you, be proud of their grandmom, and be proud of the fact that I was able to call you my friend. And I'll end by saying this: in the story of the history of free speech in Britain, remember the name Marieha Hussain.
Nels Abbey there, author who's become friends with Marieha Hussain through covering her case, and the BBC's community affairs correspondent Ashitha Nagesh, talking to me about this highly divisive word.